Welcome to Dindimba, a good name. In our culture, a good name is not just what you're called, it's what you're known for. It's your character, your honor, your legacy. It's what remains long after you're gone. That is why we say Dindimba. Because in the end, it's not just about the name you carry, it's about the name you leave behind. This is a podcast dedicated to digging deep into the legacy of the Bafo people, our history, our values, and the responsibility we carry forward. But today we take a different path. Because after all, if a good name can be built, it can also be lost. And the question we must ask ourselves is not just who we are at our best, but who we are when we fall short. To help us explore that, I'm joined by someone whose perspective bridges both depth and distance. Dr. Wase Bell Ifimba, a medical doctor with a background in public health and currently practicing in psychiatry in London, United Kingdom. She spends her days understanding people, their struggles, their behaviors, and what shapes who they become. But beyond her profession, her roots run deep, with both maternal and paternal lineage tied to Mambanda and connections to Ikiliwindi and the wider Oroko heritage. She carries a perspective shaped by both tradition and lived experience across cultures. She is someone who not only understands people, but reflects deeply on how communities grow, drift, and sometimes lose their way. And that makes her the perfect voice for today's conversation. Welcome, Dr. Ifimba.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Balimba.
It
Thank
is
you
a
so much for,
pleasure to have you today.
thank you. That was a fantastic overview. Awesome. Yes,
Oh,
I'm
you're
really
welcome.
honored to be a part of this program.
So let me start here. When you think about Dindimba, a good name, what does it mean to you personally?
I think it connotes what a name is. Basically, to me, it means somebody else's name, the name of people. And of course, that name comes with thoughts and ideas. So behind every name, there is something about the personality and all that goes with what they do, how they think, and what they do. So um, when we think about things that have made a difference in our lives, or people who've made a difference in our lives, or not just in Cameroon or in Bafoland, but in the wider society. So we have things like, uh, now I've lost my train of thought. Anyway, you basically have people who've shaped the world, so and with their ideas, and that name lives on even after they've passed. Yes, and also it can be lost as well.
That's
So
true. That's
um,
absolutely true. Let's
today,
talk about that.
today
Let's
we
talk
think
about
about
that.
people like Martin Luther King, for instance, and what he
Yes,
stood for. Right? He may be gone, but he stood for the liberation of the Black people. And so that idea still lingers on. Yeah. So, and it is attached to his name and makes his name good. And you may have people who do horrible things, and then, that thought is also attached to the name and it lingers on. So,
that is
for
true.
me, Didimba is about what you did and whether that attachment will linger on long after you've gone, or it will die out, or it will be known for something bad. So,
I like that. I
in
like that a lot. In fact,
mm,
I guess that takes us to our first question, right?
Mhm.
What have you ever had any feelings like our Bafor culture, our Bafor tradition, our people sometimes are at the cusp of losing their good name?
I hope not, but there is no doubt that we have a lot of challenges within our Bafo culture, big challenges, starting with the fact that very few people speak the language. It is a dying language. I remember I was talking to an aunt of mine, and she said she was speaking Bafo to somebody, and that was in Kumba, in the heart of Kumba town. And somebody turned around and asked, "Ah, mommy, what language are you speaking?" And she said, "This is Bafo language. This is the language of Kumba town." Not too long ago. And this person could not recognize the language. Sometimes even if you cannot speak a language, like, we can recognize what Douala is like, what Bayangi is like. But for Bafo, and I don't know if up to 1,000 people actually speak Bafo. So it's a dying language, but I hope it's not. And I know there's so many people trying to revive it. And I think that is one of the issues that we have, that it's not been passed on from generation to generation, unlike other tribes who would teach their children their languages, their dialects. We don't do that. For instance, the Dualas would do it, the Bangis would do it, other ethnic minorities would do it, but not the Bafos. And when you lose a language is really tied to the culture. Then you lose so many things as well. But I'm hoping that although we've lost the language, we've not lost the tradition, the foods we eat, how we dress, how we welcome children, how we get married, how we conduct funerals and stuff like that.
But let's talk about that a little bit, Doctor. When you
Mhm.
say the language is connected to the rest of our culture, how do you mean?
So, how we express ourselves, and because obviously our culture is an expression of our baffonesness, and that would be translated in language, or the language will be translated into concrete action. If we cannot speak the language, then how do we translate all those traditions into concrete action if we don't understand what they meant? And it's not just speaking the language, it's also the unspoken communication, which in certain tribes is worth something. Within the Bafo tribe, I would imagine that even the unspoken communication matters as well. So if we cannot really speak the language, we cannot really translate the culture as such. Because I think it goes hand in hand with the culture, in so to speak.
So
And not only that, the intonations and
the
yeah.
pronunciations and all of that.
Yes, yes.
So when you hear stories that like the one you just told us, about being in a Bafo village like Kumba, and people don't
Mhm.
even recognize the fact that Lifo is our language, um, is that frustrating to you?
Of course it is. And not only frustrating, it's really worrying because we risk being swallowed up by other people, especially within the Bafo tribes and villages and a big metropolis like Kumba. How can we afford to be lost? Where did we go wrong? How come in our homes we're not teaching our children the languages? How come in Kumba it's not a language that is spoken in primary school, secondary school, at least, and maybe high school?
Why do you think that is? Why don't we? I mean, because I absolutely hear what you're saying, and it begs the question, why aren't more Bafo people speaking out their languages, especially in their village? I would assume that if you go to, I don't know, an Igbo village, they will speak nothing but Igbo. Why do you think that's different in our Bafo villages?
Absolutely. I think something has been lost in us. I don't think we take that pride in our buffourness, in our culture, and in our language. Because if we did, then we would have upheld it. We've been swallowed up by other cultures and customs. And I think colonialism and maybe slavery, but more so colonialism, has played a negative role in how we perceive ourselves, and in particular the Bafo person. And I'm not exactly sure why, because even other ethnic groups in Cameroon are not like that. The Doualas are not like that. The Bassas are not like that. The Wondos are not like that. But and it's not because we're a minority group and not that much minority, but I think inherently we do not really appreciate our Bafones, our culture, and we've allowed it to be adulterated by other cultures. I mean, one of the things that has been quite contentious is the culture, the juju tradition, and things like that. Some people have said it is evil, and others have wanted to do away with it and imbibe um Christian religion or whatever religion that they feel comfortable with. But then you have to ask yourself, why would you want to take on another man's form of religion and not yours? What makes us bad? What makes us evil? So we need to ask
Well, why
ourselves
don't
these
you
questions.
answer?
I'm not very sure about the answers, but obviously, I think there isn't a deep understanding or deep respect for our culture, unlike other people's. And I'm not exactly sure why that is the case. And I think that's what's eroded the language and the culture over time because we
We've
think that
talked
other
about
cultures are better.
so we've talked about some of these problems. We've talked about the language and the loss of the culture. Why do you think these issues persist? Because, okay, here we are now in the diaspora, for instance, right? You've talked to me about the frustrations that you have.
Mhm.
Why do we not move our frustrations and push our culture forward to our own children?
I think to be able to do that, we there has to be a critical mass of people to effect a positive change in the right direction. And I think for those of us who don't speak the language very well, it becomes challenging, especially when we're in a foreign land. And I think there are moves to change that so that I think with the advent of AI, those things will change over time. So we will have it in AI and then we'll be able to learn speaking before, like you learn to speak Chinese or Japanese or French, as a second language. So I'm very hopeful that that is going to happen. And I think that the absence of it has made things, has allowed the status quo to persist. But over time, I'm sure that will change and it needs to change. I would really love to be fluent in Bafo. And I would hope that when I'm gone, 50 years, 100 years from now, that we would have areas where people would be able to speak Bafo fluently, not only in conversation, but even in the sciences, in the arts, in everyday life, because that is what it's missing. A lot of the language is translated into the Bible, but not other aspects of life. So I think that's where we need to break it, and I'm hoping that that would happen.
We've spoken a lot about the language, but isn't there don't we have a responsibility, even where maybe the language may be difficult to communicate or to teach, to
Mhm.
still propagate our culture?
Yes, we do. And but what is culture? It's in the way you greet, in the way you speak, in the language. It's in what you cook. It's in how you even relate to other members of the family or to your leaders or your elders. It's in the way you welcome a child. It's in the way you welcome people to your home. Um, it's in the way you do all kinds of things as a human being. Um, Yes, and there is that aspect of it that persists. A lot of us like the buffet foods, whether it's koki, elem, belembe, and all those things. We cook them in our homes,
Mhm.
and we know that other people also cook those foods. But beyond things like just cooking, yes, we do have marriage ceremonies conducted in Bafoland, but I don't know how Bafo tradition, whether it's entirely Bafo tradition or it can be conducted in Bafo tradition, unlike the Yorubas and how they do their own stuff. Um, how we welcome children, that is another thing. Yes. But do we apply culture on a day to day basis? I don't think so. I mean, I don't. I mean,
That's
what
an
is the.
interesting that's an interesting perspective. So what then would you call or perceive as the Bafo identity? What does that really mean?
That's very challenging. Of course, I do identify myself as a Bafo woman, no doubt about it. Instinctively, I feel Bafo. But can somebody else just see me and know that I'm a Bafo woman? I don't think so. Unless I tell them. Um, I even have, it's even hard for people to consider me Cameroonian, let alone Bafo, for
Mm,
that matter. So, because there isn't a real Bafo identity in terms of how you look, what you wear. The kaba is worn by other ethnic groups, whether you're Bakweri, or Bafo, or Bangi, all of them wear that. Even in our food, and food is not something that can be seen externally, except somebody invites you to their home and then you make koki and they say, "Oh, this where does this come from?" And then you tell them. But and I think that's where we've in a way lost it. And maybe it's fine, because in life, people change, cultures change, life is dynamic. We don't need to be the way our ancestors were. But, and do we necessarily have to have a way of being before? Maybe. I mean, it's something I've not really
I
thought
mean,
about.
but what you tell us, you are a psychiatrist. What happens to people when they don't have a strong sense of identity?
Again, a strong sense of identity in one sense, people can identify in various ways. I mean, you can be a mom, a wife, a sister, um, a doctor. So you take on many caps, and there's not just one identity per se.
I see.
So, but I think what is most important is having confidence in the self on who you really are, how grounded you are in terms of your values. That is fundamentally more important because people are a melange of different things or that constitute them. So it's not we're not defined by just one thing per se. But what is most important is realizing that you've got value because you were born into the world. It doesn't matter whether you're Bafo, Bakweri, Oroko, or whatever. By just being born into this world, you got value. You matter, and that is fundamentally important. Even before you wear your Bafo cloth, that is important. That you need to be treated with respect and dignity, irrespective of who you are, tall, short, fat, handsome, ugly, or what have you, stupid, or dull, or clever, or whatever. We need to respect the human being, irrespective of whether they're Bafo or not. And then, yes, then you can identify yourself as Bafo. It doesn't matter. And that Bafoness also has to be respected. If you choose to respect yourself, I mean, to identify yourself as a Bafo woman or whatever, that ought to be respected as well. So I think what is important to the human being is that they recognize that by just being born into this world, they are worthy.
That's very, very inspiring.
Mm.
Now, if we continue on that road of, the things that could be better for our culture, teaching the language, reinforcing the culture, is there any responsibility born of the leadership?
Yes, I would think so. But the first responsibility obviously is to the self. However, it depends at what stage in your life. So you don't expect children to know what the language if if they've not been taught by their parents or significant others who have that responsibility to teach their young ones the language. And then as you grow older, even if you've not been taught the language, it's for you to determine who you'd identify with, who you are, and what you want out of the life process. So there are many layers, and now the leadership can take on the role of ensuring that those people who want to identify with that culture or with the language are giving the necessary tools to be able to propagate that. So, for instance, I would hope that within the leadership, there's some kind of a think tank of how do we promote our Bafones? How do we ensure that this language is spoken by our people and even others who may want to speak it as well? How do we ensure that we propagate our culture and vice versa? And I would hope that we can actually formulate something like that. But not only that, also, how many of us are Bafors? Those statistics are necessary. I went to the statistical office one time in Boya to find out about statistics of how many Bafo people exist, whether full Bafo, half Bafo, whatever. I couldn't even get it. But
Where in
that's,
Cameroon?
yes, it was in Boya. And I think our leadership has the responsibility to do things like that because individuals cannot do it. But there
That's a
has to
fair
be
point.
some kind of think tank that would enable things like that to happen, see the necessity, and then find a way of getting it done.
So you've brought up a good point that there's certain things that happen from the home that the leadership can't really touch, It's the parents who have to
Mhm.
teach their children how to speak,
Mhm.
It's the parents that convey what the culture is and and the children
Yes.
carry it forward. So then what exactly can the leaders do that can help the smaller units, the family units to propagate our culture forward?
Mm. So I think the leadership can help us, first of all, to recognize the problems that we have in terms of the challenges we face with our culture and the language, and set up some kind of committee to address those challenges. And I think they're doing it in certain areas. So, especially with the language and AI and stuff like that, and also spread that information across the board, not only within the Bafo villages and nationally, but even within the diaspora as well, so that people know that, okay, there may be this program that helps you to learn how to speak Bafo. There may be this place in this town or city where you can go and eat a nice Bafo meal, and encourage people to also um, sell the culture through entrepreneurship, through the internet, having websites and things like that. It could, and it's not just food, it could be arts and crafts as well. It could also be in videos on how to do marriages. And I think Sister Vanessa Sona did a video of I think it was an occasion of how to welcome a child in
Yes,
Bafo
she did.
culture. Yeah, so things like that, one can learn from them. But also things like drama. What about movies? What about radio? So there's a lot that we can do. What we need to do is get ourselves organized, to propagate our Bafo culture. language, and other things that help us.
And what if we don't? How are we risking damaging our name if nothing changes?
Well, if nothing changes, we will be forgotten. We will be swallowed up by other groups and we may become extinct. And that is a big fear, and it's a palpable fear already. Like I said, when I was talking to my cousin, he was telling me that he doesn't think that up to 1,000 people actually speak the language. I hope that number is up now. Yeah, it's a real fear that if we don't do something, we'll become extinct, and Bafo culture or Bafo tribe will not exist. That's why we need to act and act now.
Now, in terms of our accountability, we've talked about the leaders, we've talked about even families, but to avoid that horrific future, what responsibility and accountability do we each carry individually for our culture?
So I think that responsibility goes to the individual, not only the leadership. First and foremost, to the individual. So if you consider yourself a Bafo person, then you need to do the needful. You need to learn about the culture, if possible, learn about the language. But obviously, we've got a lot of challenges with that because do we have avenues to be able to do that? They are few and far beyond. And then even sometimes, do you have relatives or friends close by? Especially for us in the diaspora, it's a little bit difficult because you may even have somebody who speaks Bafo very well, but everybody is doing their own thing. So they may not have enough time to teach you that. But I think if you're really that interested, you can find somebody, pay them, because time is money, obviously, to learn about the culture and the language. And then there are also, you can, from the self, you go into groups. So you have Bafo groups in different parts of the world, including nationally, and then within the diaspora. So those are also avenues for us to do that. I mean, you talked before we even started the program about what the youths were saying, and I think that the groups we form within the diaspora are very much needed. And I think we should make them even more meaningful by ensuring that everybody speaks the language and that much of the meetings are conducted in Bafo so that when people come, they'll be forced to learn the language, you know. And then if it is recorded, if they don't understand, then they go back and then using their AI tools, they can learn that. So that is at the level of small groups. But again, the leadership, the Bafo traditional leadership, this is not even, which may also be the national leadership, has a role to play in ensuring that all these manifestations are done in a way that they can be propagated appropriately using digital media. I don't know, maybe having a museum or even festivals and things like that. But that's why I would advocate, if there isn't any, a think tank to think these things through and to come up with solutions to the problems that we have. And I also talked about what about having a restaurant? You know, you would go somewhere and then somebody will say, oh, they have a bangi restaurant where they're making fufu and iro. What about a Bafo restaurant where you could have a lamb, mpu
Yes.
and koki? I mean, even in Kumba, I doubt that, if you look for a restaurant where they make koki or mpu, that you'd find it. It's unbelievable. It's difficult. But in Kumbade, you'd easily find fufu and eru. Why? And yet these foods do taste nice and they're nutritious and healthy as well, or can be made to be healthy.
Now, despite everything that we've just said, what gives you hope and what would you say to our viewers with regards to the hope that you feel and you see in our Bafo culture?
Um, I am hopeful. Life is a never ending, challenging journey, but one has to be hopeful. And like we said before, one of the constants in life is change. And change will come, whether we like it or not, it will come. I think the advent of the internet, the digital space, AI are going to make those changes quicker, faster, and it will be impossible to stop it. So I'm hopeful from that perspective that if we want to make positive change in the area of tradition, enhancing our culture and language, that can be done. What we need to do is to be focused, organized, and then dissipate all these things that need to help us propagate our culture and tradition. So I don't, and again, I think a lot of us, there's a critical mass of us that identify as Bafo. So whether we like it or not, it will happen. Yes.
Uh,
And
what
mhm,
about in 10 to 20 years from now? In your
mhm.
opinion, what would a good name look like for us?
I'm hoping a good name would signify a people who have a sense of belonging, not just to the land, the traditions, and the language, but also people who want to see their fellow human being thrive and do well, and not just themselves. Because we should be each other's keeper at the end of the day, the social beings. You know, without that, if we're only thinking about the me, myself, and I, we're not going to go anywhere. So we should be able to hold each other's hand, pull each other up before we can move forward.
I
And
like
I
that a
think
lot.
that would help us keep the good Bafonim. We need to do good, and we have to be seen to be doing good and prop each other up. We cannot do it on our own. It's not going to work.
Do you believe we can get there?
Absolutely, we can, but we need to have the resolve. If we don't, it might just take a longer time. But yes, I think we can get there.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Efimba. This has been
You're welcome.
very enlightening. Um,
Thank you.
you're very welcome. Now, viewers, as we close, we've had an honest conversation. It's not always comfortable, but necessary. Because a good name is not lost in a single moment. It is lost in what we ignore, what we tolerate, and what we allow to continue. And yet, even in that truth, there is something powerful. If a name can be lost, it can also be rebuilt.
Mhm.
Not through words, but through action, through accountability, through a willingness to be better than we were before. Today was not about placing blame, it was about recognizing responsibility. Because the future of our name is not something we wait for, it is something we shape every day in every choice we make, just as you heard from Dr. Efimba. And so we return to this Dindimba, not just the name we carry, but the name we choose to become. This has been Dindimba, a good name. Thank you.